migrants come across the border and they're screened by the Border Patrol officers. Every day now, about 10 to 12,000 people are being apprehended by the Border Patrol, but the gotaways are 3,000 a day. So apprehending 10 to 12,000, they're anticipating it being 15,000 a day. My hometown of Great Bend, so it's like the city of Great Bend coming across the borders every day now for the next several months is what we're anticipating. Beyond that, what it looks like to me, the Border Patrol has incredible technology. They're able to screen these people very efficiently now. It's almost like Ticketmaster for coming into this country now. So the immigrants can come across the border. Often they have an app downloaded, applying for asylum. Our officers take a picture of them, their name, they send them to the NGOs or towards our own Border Patrol facilities. They may be there for a day or two or less, and then I don't know where they're going. All I can tell you is even this morning when I was there at about sunup, there was busload after busload of illegal migrants that were being shipped somewhere. I want to stop and just to talk about my compassion and humanity for the situation though. I've done mission work all over the world, and certainly this reminded me of a refugees crisis center, so what this has turned into. And certainly we want to do everything we can to humanely treat the people that we are encountering, but we just certainly don't have the personnel to keep up with the problems going on at the border right now. This president's policies are a magnet to keep drawing more and more people into this nation. And why does that impact Kansas? Well, Kansas, like every state, is now a border state. Last week, the Border Patrol seized 56 pounds of fentanyl. We don't know how much got through the border, but we know it's enough to kill approximately 300 young Americans every day. So every day in America, about 300 young adults are dying of plane crashing every day. We've lost more young adults to fentanyl poisoning the last year than the entire Vietnam War. As we all know, just one pill, a half a pill can kill, and most often this is laced in some type of fentanyl. And my point is that it's going to get worse. 90% of our Border Patrol officers are engaged being a nurse, being a social worker, helping with transportation, doing anything but control our border. So as they're inundated with folks coming across the river, and by the way, that river has cost the lives of some 985 people in the past year that have drowned trying to cross that river. But as they try to keep up with that, the Border Patrol keeping up with those folks that need their help, the cartels just dump them. They just dump them in the river and makes the cartel jump in to rescue them. So while that's going on down the river, the cartel is sneaking and smuggling through fentanyl. And it's way more than just fentanyl. I'm just alarmed by the human trafficking, the sex trafficking. Last year in this country, $13 billion is what the cartel made on sex trafficking alone. $13 billion. Folks, we could ask the sheriff and the KBI director, is the cartel in Wichita, is it in Kansas City? But my guess it is, and they're very, very organized. A lot of these folks, and this is what the Border Patrol officers are telling me, is that they're an indentured servant to the cartel, and some of them will spend 5 or 10 years paying off that debt as an indentured servant or some type of human sex trafficking as well. Again, I think that the situation's going to get worse because of the policies of this president. As I asked the Border Patrol over and over again what they needed, and this is different than before. This is my 4th trip. Before they would tell me we need more officers, we need more resources, we need more doctors and dentists and psychologists and all those things. But today and yesterday, what they told me is we need a policy. We need to go back to the Remain in Mexico policy to stop our catch and release. That we cannot possibly get enough officers there to catch everybody, but we need to send off this beacon of saying everybody come now and cross the border now. So I'm very grateful that some of our law enforcement officers are here to kind of update this on fentanyl poisoning. If they have any comments on human trafficking, sex trafficking, I would certainly welcome those comments as first, and I'm not sure who's going to go first. Sheriff Easter, do you mind coming up and talking first and kind of giving us a Sedgwick County update? Thank you for doing this. You bet.
Well, good afternoon. won't echo a lot what Senator Barnes had to say. However, I will tell you from a fentanyl standpoint, that is all coming across the board. We've been talking about that for a year here, and it's not getting any better. We are seeing the increase in overdose deaths. We see the increase in violent crime associated with fentanyl and other drugs, those type of things. That is all cartel controlled, period. Do we have factions of cartel members here in Wichita, Sedgwick County, Kansas area? The answer to that is yes. Does that attribute to some of our violent crime? Yes, it does. Do we have sex trafficking? Yes, we do. And that's something that we've really tried to address through the Exploited Missing Children unit in the last 3 years by boosting that unit and really trying to get embedded in those different programs to eradicate the human sexual trafficking, because most of those kids are under the age of 18. And so those are things that we see that's taking place here locally because of our policies on the border. I don't see it getting any better. I'm worried about the fact that if folks are released into the United States to say, hey, you know, go anywhere you want, or if in the past there has been different policies where they would ship people to different bigger cities, our resources here are tapped out. As we have spoken about numerous times, our mental health resources are tapped out, our social services are tapped out. You see the homeless situation taking place here, so a lot of our housing situation is at full max. I don't know what we will do here if that becomes the policy and we're gonna receive an influx of people. I feel for these folks, don't get me wrong. They're fleeing a place to be safer, which is the United States of America. But the problem is, we have citizens ourselves that we need to take care of that we're not properly taken care of right now. I don't know how we will do that in the future. So I echo what Senator Marshall says and want to ensure that, you know, from a law enforcement perspective, we will try to do everything we possibly can if that becomes an issue that comes to the Sedgwick County area. But from a perspective of the drug use and the drug policies and those type of things, it is a big issue here. And we can tell you, fentanyl doesn't come from anywhere else. It's not manufactured here in the United States. It comes from the cartels through the Mexican border, and that's a problem.
Sure, thank you. KPI Director Tony Mattivi, you could come up and tell us why Kansas is unfortunately a border state.
Well, all we have are border states now, Senator. Thank you for the invitation, I appreciate it. We appreciate hearing from you what's happening down there last night and again this morning. There is no doubt that we're experiencing a fentanyl crisis in the United States right now. It's all across the country, and it certainly is in every community in Kansas. There is no part of our society that is immune from this problem. Fentanyl is more available in our state than ever. We're seeing a sharp rise in overdose deaths. And if you look at the 2-year period from 2020 to 2022, the KBI saw a fentanyl increase in lab submissions of 900%. So that gives you an indication of what we're seeing now, and unfortunately we're not seeing anything that indicates that this trend is going anywhere but up. The Senator and Sheriff Easter are exactly correct. This is a cartel-driven problem. There's no question the cartels are operating in Kansas. We're seeing very sophisticated distribution networks all across the state. This is not coming from anywhere other than across our southern border. We're seeing fentanyl being sold on its own, and we're seeing it being laced in or mixed with every other drug that we're seeing. We got a report this morning of a fentanyl death resulting from someone smoking a joint that was laced with fentanyl. So it is impossible to overstate the breadth of this problem. It really is in every aspect of drugs that we've seen and in every part of our community. I was at a conference last week and another one this week talking with law enforcement leaders from around the country. What we know is that the spread of fentanyl really is out of control, and it's happening everywhere in the United States. So I hate to say this, but the travesty at our southern border is fueling the tragedy that we're seeing here in our community. And there's two issues. I mean, to break it down, what we're seeing is law enforcement resources are having to be thrown at this issue, and we don't have the resources to do that. But the other issue is, as law enforcement is paying attention to what's happening in front of them with immigration, what's happening behind their backs. And that's where the fentanyl is coming in. That's what we're seeing. So thank you, Senator, for your partnership on this important issue. Thank you, Sheriff Easter, for your partnership in trying to keep this dangerous poison out of our communities. And I will turn it back over to you, Senator.
Thank you. Sheriff, why don't you come up here, and Tony, stay here just a second too. Maybe a couple questions from my perspective. Sheriff, you talked about resources, and just returning from Texas, we had a round table, similar people like you there at the round table. A young farmer, a rancher, fifth generation rancher, was teaching his wife how to use a .410 shotgun before he came to see us. He was moving his family because it wasn't safe anymore. The local sheriff there, hundreds of dead bodies that they found. You can no longer feel safe to hunt on your own land. They've been having floods down there. The EMS workers were just overwhelmed as well. And I mean, what happens to Sedgwick County if 100, 200, 1,000 illegal immigrants come into this county right now? When you talk about resources, you're part of this emergency response team. What does that stress look like to you?
So it would look the same when it comes to public safety services, because, you know, they're gonna need medical help, they're gonna need law enforcement services. Really, the main issue that I see is our mental health capacity and our homeless shelter capacity. Those are gonna be two issues that if it does happen, that would really strain our resources, because they're already strained right now in Wichita.
Director Mattivi, talk just a second about Kansas being at this crossroads of America. 2 years ago, the national media kept asking, why do you care? As an OBGYN, I saw this sex trafficking coming through Kansas. Not necessarily that this was the place where they stayed, but they were passing through Kansas. And it looks like to me the cartels are just following the same migration, where the drugs went, where the human trafficking goes. There's 3 major arteries from southern Texas that come right this way.
And we know that a great deal of the fentanyl that gets trafficked across the United States comes through Kansas. We have an initiative right now to try to interrupt all of that trafficking. And if it was just going through, that would be one thing, but nothing just passes through, right? We feel the ramifications and the effects of everything that goes through, because some of it stays here, and that's what we have to deal with every day.
Thanks. Maybe we'll stop and open it up to some questions. I can go into some more details if you like. Yes, go ahead.
Anyone can chime in. In terms of indentured servitude, do we have an idea of just how deeply that runs in Sedgwick County and how much crime is cartel related in Sedgwick County?
I'm gonna talk big pictures, they kind of think about their answer. So certainly, I was talking to sheriffs and the Texas Rangers and those groups of people, and what they were describing, the indentured servitude, they were working in restaurants, service industries, and of course, it was cash deal where somebody that has a big restaurant chain or maybe a motel chains were passing cash on to the cartel. So unbeknownst to many people, that's what's going on. For me to say it's going on in Kansas, I can't tell you, but certainly it was a topic of conversation for us at the round table, and I'm not sure if you want to speak to anything in Sedgwick County.
The only thing I can tell you in Sedgwick County, the cartels have been here for a while. They came here in the 90s. And it started with cocaine, they moved on, and it was all the methamphetamine trafficking, and still fentanyl. So when we talk about the drug trade, that's all cartel related. When it comes to the indentured servitude, if we get the right victim to come forward and say, hey, this is what happened to me and I've been sex trafficked now for a year. Do we get a lot of people that want to tell that story? No, we do not. Has there been cases? I'm aware of 2 in the last year and a half where folks have been sex trafficked that came from the southern border and talked about it was the cartels, and that's who they're having to pay their money back to.
Director, anything you're allowed to talk about?
So one of the things that concerned us about the legislation that we saw in the State House this year to legalize cannabis was we looked just across our southern border, and we know that the marijuana grow operations that are being conducted legally in Oklahoma are surrounded by human trafficking and sex trafficking operations to support those legal marijuana grows. So that's one of our overwhelming concerns with any sort of efforts to legalize cannabis for whatever purpose.
Well, I learned something. Go ahead.
Quick question for you, and my apologies if you've already answered this. I just want to know why Kansas? Why the cartels have different places that we've all heard, you know, that they're active in or go, especially California. Why Kansas?
So I don't think Kansas is special. I think every state has this going on now. But the one difference is we are certainly at the intersection of major north-south transportation system and east-west. And as much as it's easy to get wheat from Kansas down to the Gulf, it's just as easy to go back up those same streams, so to speak. Think about the Pan American Highway. It goes all the way from Panama through Great Bend and ends up in Canada somewhere. So for decades, this has been the path that drug cartels have used to get in and through Kansas. But I don't know there's anything special about this. I just I think that it's becoming more obvious to every state now.
Let me take
Please.
that on, if you don't mind. It's in Kansas because there's a market, right? Fentanyl is the most profitable drug that the cartels have ever seen, and that's why they're shifting their attention to fentanyl now. If there is a market, the cartels are going to fill it, whether that's in Kansas or Texas or Minnesota, right? So the reason that they're here is because there's a market. That also tells us that we're not going to be able to enforce our way out of this problem. We have to have targeted and effective enforcement measures, but we also have to educate. If there is one takeaway from this, it is I wish every teenager in Kansas would understand how dangerous it is to do any drug, because we're seeing fentanyl mixed with every single type of drug, and we have to try to educate our way out of this problem at the same time that we try to do targeted enforcement of it.
And Director, I'm gonna add on to that, it's not just illegal drugs that are being laced, it's Adderall, it's oxycodone and some other legal drugs as well. Sheriff, anything you want to add?
No, sir.
That good? Okay.
What's like how has it changed about, like, is there still a quota of people they will let in, and then what happens from there? They go somewhere and they wait on their case to be heard, or what did it go from? I mean, I feel like I understand a little bit, but what did it go from, and now what's more specific, maybe?
Right.
I mean,
You bet. So under the previous administration, maybe several hundred people were crossing the border every day. And then we go up to 3,000 to 4,000 people a day, and then have a big spike here 2 weeks ago up in the 8,000 to 10,000 people crossing the border, being apprehended every day. And now we're expecting it to be 15,000 a day. Mexico will only take back 500 people per day right now. And why, that's, it's just what the quota they decided on, but we don't have a quota. And that was the Border Patrol's point over and over to me, is that they think it's going to get worse. And without some type of a remain in Mexico policy like we had previously, it's going to keep getting worse. The Border Patrol officers told me over and over again, the White House's new policy is not going to work, that they can still circumvent it by claiming amnesty. So a person walks across the border, the cartel tells them the magic words that I want asylum, that I'm afraid for my life, and whether that's true or not would be something that needs to be adjudicated. But they're all saying the same thing, and they're being released into the countryside anywhere without being properly vetted. And at the end of the day, that their next court appointment may be 5 to 7 years later.
And do they decide where they go from there when they're waiting?
The person can go anywhere they want to, but quite often the government is working with the NGOs and placing them on buses, trains, or planes and sending them all over the country.
Do we know that they're coming to Kansas then?
Oh, absolutely, they're coming to Kansas. They have been for, goodness, at least a year that I'm aware of, at least a year. But we're expecting those numbers to go up. And Kansas will respond, we'll do our best. You think about what Kansas did way back to the Vietnam War when all those refugees were coming across, and places like Garden City and Dodge and Wichita opened their arms to these folks, found them housing, found them sheltering, got them jobs. But we cannot keep up with numbers like this. That's the humanitarian crisis, is look, we want to help everybody we can, but this nation has 1 million legal immigrants come into this year in our country every year. 1 million legal immigrants come in every year. We issue probably 6 or 7 million temporary work visas as well. So I'm in favor of legal immigration, but illegal immigration is going to tear this country down, and it opens the door for illegal fentanyl to come across the border.
If it was already coming through though, I get you're trying to say now they're like more distracted over here, but I don't really see how that makes that much of a difference, right? Now you have more eyes over here, but if they were already smuggling in before, why does this make such an alarming, why would this make you that much more concerned if it was already coming through? didn't seem, I don't think there's any shortage of it.
You ought to be concerned by the number of deaths we're seeing, and you ought to be concerned about the increases that we're seeing in those numbers of deaths, right?
But it's
This
already
is-
happening.
It has, and it's gonna get worse, and this is gonna contribute, and that's why you ought to be concerned about it.
Just because now there's more eyes on one place and they're gonna see for.
I wish you would come to the border and visit it. I mean, to me, it's very obvious, the challenge here. The cartel uses, these people that are human trafficking to smuggle in the drugs as well. So just the raw numbers of people coming across is gonna increase those opportunities for them to smuggle the drugs in. But it's gonna go from worse to horrible is the situation. That's why we're seeing the price of fentanyl come down, is because of the increased amounts that are coming across the border.
You have any more specific about like what fentanyl prices have done?
So, last year when we really started, noticing, that all of our numbers were going up from seizures of fentanyl to overdose poisonings, deaths, those type of things. We, as undercover sections, we're purchasing pills for $8 a pill. Right now, we're purchasing those for $1 a pill. So it decreased by $7 in a year. And that's, what that tells you is that there's a lot more coming, and that there's a lot more in this community than there was a year ago.
We know that historically, drug prices in Kansas have trailed drug prices along the border by about a year. And I know from my colleagues along the southern border right now that they're paying somewhere in the neighborhood of 26 cents for a fentanyl pill.
I want to go back to a trip I just did to Colombia. And I would tell you after that trip, I'm much more concerned about the national security threat from the cartel than I am from the Chinese military. That the same folks that have driven the methamphetamine and the cocaine trafficking for years are now starting to make the fentanyl. They're using the same supply networks. This is a business to these people. Basically, the drugs that leave Colombia are unfettered as they go through Mexico. Mexico turns their head because they want this industry going through their country. So as those experienced drug lords become more and more involved with this, I think that we're gonna see an even bigger problem, and we're gonna see fentanyl take over that cocaine marketing as well. And I bet they're seeing that on the street, that fentanyl is now becoming the drug of choice for so many people, not only because it's inexpensive, but it's just the sheer volume of it. It's so much easier to make than it is to take the cocoa leaf and turn that into cocaine. But it is absolutely a very significant problem. We're only stopping 10% of the drugs that come out of Colombia. Right now, the fentanyl precursors are coming out of China into Mexico. That's where it's made. The Chinese pharmacists working with the Mexican cartel, and then that money coming up, or the fentanyl coming in the United States, and then they're laundering that money using Chinese nationalists to get that money back to China one way or another. So it's quite an intricate circuit. I'm just absolutely overwhelmed with the complex supply chains that they've developed. It really looks like an agriculture product going back and forth.
Senator, you mentioned an application that migrants are using.
Right.
Are migrants finding a way to circumvent that app? I mean, is there something embedded in the app that can catch red flags if someone were to have a criminal record?
So I think they're using it in the way it's meant to be, because it helps them get through the process sooner. I don't think they're trying to circumvent it. Somehow, again, the cartel and the Mexican government are communicating with the Border Patrol in America about when we can handle more. And one way they can do that is having the folks that have filled out this application electronically.
Well, because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe only a certain number of folks can get into that application per day, depending on how many appointments there are. So those who are just kind of left by the wayside trying to get a spot, I mean,
Okay.
how are they going about it if they can't even get an appointment in the first place?
So they're doing it the traditional way.
Okay.
I mean, they're just literally crossing the border and showing up and asking for amnesty. But I think the technology is streamlining it one way or the other. Again, my fourth visit, I can just tell the number of people they're cranking through per minute is just amazing. And clearly their purpose is, how many people can we get into this country? That is their goal. That they're not concerned about vetting these people before they cross the border.
We have time for one more question.
Last question.
Okay.
I mean, we all know the cartel is a pretty sophisticated operation, if you will. Are there any concerns that for them to be as powerful as they are in the US, that they are working with people who may have positions of power to allow it or help perpetuate it? Is that a concern to you?
Absolutely, absolutely, yes, and I'm very concerned as a US Senator to see what is the relationship between the cartel and Mexican government leaders. I'm not sitting here, I don't wanna make any
Or
accusations.
US leaders, I mean.
I'm sorry, I do not believe cartel's working with US leaders, no, not at all. But I do think that the cartel has been a part of the culture of Colombia and Mexico and Central America for decades, and they are woven into their governments there. Okay? Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you. Sure. Thank you. Yeah, Director? You bet. My pleasure as well.